enterprise blockchains, and so I want to switch it up a little bit here. So I work on a project called Token Analyst, and we're a London-based company, and basically what we do is we analyze public blockchains to start with, because it's a crazy world out there. There's a lot of crazy things going on in the public blockchain world. Several million people all over the world use public blockchains today, and we started with the initiative to just bring more transparency into this space, basically, because there's so many things that are going on in the space that people aren't really aware of. And when we really started, the majority of the attention, even today, the majority of the attention is on the price of crypto assets, of things like Bitcoin or Ethereum, the top tokens. Then we really thought this was just the tip of the iceberg. Price, market cap, exchange volume, social sentiment, what people are talking about in the news, on Twitter and things like that. It's really just the tip of the iceberg, because there's so much data and so much insight to be gained from looking at what's going on the blockchain itself. Because the blockchain is just a big database, and we thought, hey, why not look at the data that's on this database, the global database, and try to make some sense out of it. And so some of you may be aware or not aware, but a lot of the public blockchain organizations today have tokens associated with them, and these tokens are basically just ways to raise money to fuel their projects. A lot of them are kind of driven, the functionality of these organizations is driven by smart contracts that live on the blockchain, which basically just are pieces of code that execute. When something happens, something else happens. So I transact with a smart contract. That smart contract does something in the world of the blockchain using code. And so stuff that we can uncover from looking at the data on the blockchain include what are the exact functions that are called within these smart contracts. In a smart contract that has the functions transfer, mint, and burn, we can see how many times is mint actually called and by whom. It's just as a basic level, pretty interesting stuff. And then more interesting for us really is deciphering who's using these crypto assets, who's really transacting. We've seen crazy things happen. Just yesterday, I saw a Litecoin transaction for over 100 million happen, just one single transaction. So it's like very curious to know who exactly are the parties that are transacting in such large amounts. And so our approach to solving this is to essentially really put a focus on the address. So the address is basically the user account for anyone on the blockchain. It's a cryptographic hash. It looks kind of like this. And what we're trying to do is classify these addresses into distinct types of entities. So exchange addresses, bot addresses, human addresses, and more granular classifications as we keep going. And the way that we're trying to approach this, because all these addresses are essentially anonymous, is by looking at pattern recognition on the blockchain. So as a basics metric, we can look at transaction volumes, how much is the amount of tokens being transferred on average for a given address, the kind of uniqueness of addresses that they transact with. So we've seen several addresses transact with the same address over and over and over again every single day at the same exact time. So it's most probably an automated or bot-like address. And so we see there are a lot of different patterns just on the blockchain itself, which allow us to loosely configure and take a good guess at what kind of entity this given address is. And so the discovery we've kind of come upon is if we can take these guesses at scale across the entire public blockchain network, including Bitcoin, including Ethereum, we can really come upon a rich classification network of addresses that are interacting with each other. So this is Omise Go. It's a popular public token on the Ethereum blockchain. And what we've basically done is refined our best guesses of addresses into machine learning models that we've trained to identify addresses at scale in real time as they are coming up on the blockchain. And historically as well, readjusting our classifications as we see new behavioral patterns. So each of these different colors here for Omise Go is a part of the Omise Go address network, people who hold Omise Go, people or things or organizations. And the different colors are basically different types of entities. So starting from the center of the graph and outward is from the token sale period onwards. So token sale was when we say go, the project raised several hundred million in funding. And the kind of pink dots, the pink nodes over here, are members of the token team themselves. The team that developed the token, developed the smart contracts, and sold the token to the public. And from there onwards, we can see the interactions between exchange addresses, between bots, between OTC desks, over-the-counter desks, which are trading billions today, every day, and between kind of pre-sale investors who got in before the public round. So these different kind of relationships is really fascinating to analyze because not only do we see examples of insider trading, coordinated bot networks to pump and dump the price systematically over and over again. And also, very interestingly, the kind of exchange patterns. So a typical cryptocurrency exchange like Coinbase, when you give Coinbase money to buy a certain cryptocurrency, it goes to an address, which then transacts to other Coinbase addresses to essentially land up in its cold storage address network. And what we're able to see is the patterns that Coinbase uses to transact internally, how it manages user funds. And so this is really interesting when compared across exchanges because we can essentially see, compare the order books of the exchanges to how they actually settle the funds on the chain. And this kind of information is really not transparent today because people are just looking at the price and saying, oh, the price is going up, I'm going to buy, right? Whereas, the price is going up, why? Because a several $billion transaction came in a week ago, and it's been sitting on the exchange, and it's been systematically being liquidated by, several different addresses on chain. So these kind of nuanced layers of analysis is what we're trying to provide, and it's just super interesting stuff. We're essentially building this kind of mesh of classification of addresses that hopefully is not only just applicable to public blockchains, but any blockchain, enterprise blockchains included. Essentially to provide more transparency to the data layer that lives on any given blockchain. And so these are all different classifications of different entities, interesting entities that and kind of metrics that we track to see what types of entity they are. And so we kind of come upon a kind of heuristic mapping of what types of behavioral patterns different entities exhibit. For example, we've seen distinct patterns in terms of money launderers, how they launder their money across different blockchains, and even across privacy-focused blockchains like Monero. And then we've also seen distinct patterns in terms of token teams themselves. How do they systematically go about raising their money, and also how do they manage their treasuries? When you raise $100, $200 million, how do you manage the treasury when the price of Ethereum goes down, for example, like it did a couple of weeks ago? And so this is also important to know because if it's a publicly traded token, it's important for owners of the token to keep the token team accountable because they can basically do whatever they want with the token. There's no regulation imposed on them to not do anything that they want with the project, with the token itself. And so that's kind of where we are at. So the goal is to do this at scale, translate this raw blockchain byte data, which we're getting from the nodes. We're running several nodes, over 20 nodes, geographically distributed across different regions all over the world on AWS. And we try to place the nodes near where the miners are, where the mining pools are, so that we get the transactions as soon as they're emitted. And also get the transactions before they're even included on the blockchain. So there's this concept of predictive consensus. So if a transaction seems especially promising to be included on the blockchain, it could be potentially valuable for an investor trying to make a decision, before the market, trying to gain some alpha over the market. So just to give some context, our initial, kind of client is institutional investors. So we're, serving hedge funds right now in Europe, all over Europe, who are investing in cryptocurrencies, and everyone is trying to get some alpha over the market. The market goes up and down, no one knows what's going on, and so this is just one specific methodology for doing so, pretty effective one, because not many people are really looking at it, and so hopefully we can get to a state where we have a unified stream of transactions, and we know exactly who's transacting for each of those transactions. Obviously, there's a trade-off between privacy and you don't want to know for sure this nuance transferring to SID because that gets a little shady. It's basically like everyone having access to your bank account if Bitcoin truly becomes a global currency. But truth be told, it's really hard for us to even get to that state because honestly, we need to track IP addresses and cookies and things of that nature to even get that granular. But we're at a stage where we can at least say this is a human or human-like address, this is a bot or bot-like address, so at a higher level of granularity and also doing it real time so that we can get the streams going for effective decision making. And so we have a web platform and an API, publicly available API, free to call if you want to get subscribed to transactions, currently just on the Ethereum blockchain, and see who's transacting, what are the types of parties that are transacting on Ethereum, and all the different tokens within it. Yeah.